And then I did another part.
Can I ask a question, Freddie?
Okay, question.
Okay, so, having gone through the same challenges you've gone, but with different subjects on divided a political history of DeKalb County, Tennessee, do you talk in your paper about, because the title I find very interesting, because in my mind, because of the years you've got, it would be the evolution of history, the evolution of political history of DeKalb County.
And that's what we'll talk about here in just a minute.
But I'm just saying that.
Okay, this was fine for the paper I was doing, the huge paper that I was doing for Dr. Pruitt's class. This was fine. She said, no problem.
No,
in fact, I went through several variations of this title. I started out as, just a political history of DeKalb County, 1837, which is the start, to 1870. Okay, because 1870, there was right after the Civil War. That gets me up through the Civil War. That's why I decided to do that.
But was there, in your discussion tonight, what were the politics of DeKalb County before 1850?
We're going to talk about that immensely here in just a minute.
That's all I want to know. Thank you.
Okay, yes, we're going to go in definite detail because from what I did there in fall of 2016 has now evolved into something completely different than I thought. Okay? When I was a kid, as most of us, I thought DeKalb was divided politically because of what major event in DeKalb County history?
Civil War.
What major event?
Civil War.
Civil War. Okay? Civil War. It's what I always thought. That's what my granddaddy had talked to my grandfather, Jim Curtis, who served as a trustee here, and he was also county commissioner for a long time, or JP back then, for several terms. And I always, quizzed him as a kid about, relatives serving in the Civil War. And that's how I got started listening on Pa Jim's front porch in Alexandria, because he was a politician and everybody and their brother would come and see it. And that's how I got started interested in history, was that. Then I go to the library in Alexandria, Miss Sue Corley and Miss Aretha Kearns. That's how I really got started in history. It was back in the 70s and trying to learn. Then later on, as I grew older, of course, I went to the high school. Guess who's the librarian at the high school? Tommy Webb. So started in genealogy. Mac Willoughby got me, there's another name for you. Mac Willoughby got me started on genealogy. So I started doing the genealogy in high school, and I still had some older relatives. I still got a lot of stuff on the Curtises, the Clayborns, C-L-A-Y-B-O-R-N. The Clayborns is my mom's side. Dad's side is the Curtises. So all in DeKalb County. Chris will tell you all about the Clayborns and the drivers and all that, the connections and all of them. On Dismal is where I was, where my mom was raised. Okay? So that involved talking to Tommy about genealogy. Then I go on into history, go to Lee College, Lee University back at the time, and then get involved in all this stuff. So this was all in my head, and I always wanted to explore why were we so divided. And Tommy does a great job. I'll plug him. Come into that one in a minute, Melanie. Okay, Tommy did a great job. Okay, going from here to here.
Turn that around.
I'll turn around, sorry about that. So going from here to here.
So you got the bicentennial, because I don't have my camera pointed.
Yep,
So you got a
bicentennial,
bicentennial history
I
going
got
to the
Tales
history of
history,
DeKalb
and I got the bicentennial history. Now, Tommy wasn't a huge Will T. Hale fan. He said there were a lot of silences in Will T. Hale, and Tommy tried to address those silences here in this book. Did a great job. But here's the deal. Not going to criticize, because I love, Tommy was my mentor. I'm not going to criticize either. Will T. Hale did a great job for what he did and what it was for in the turn of the century, okay, early 1900s. Tommy did nearly 100 years later. Tommy does another history. Does a fabulous job in his, particularly in the genealogical parts of this book. Outstanding work, okay. He's the historian emeritus since the 1950s, I guess. I think officially the 60s, but he was still the historian even before then. All right. So all that's churning in me, okay? And so I said, all right, I've got to address that. So I'll go to Tommy and say, okay, Tommy did a great job he's got the chapters he did on politics is is good. All the officials, he did all of that, all of that, all of that. But he said, I need to know the reasons why. And then Tommy said, you're going to have to go deeper. Okay? He said, I know you want to talk about the division of DeKalb County, which has been divided since the very beginning. He said, I want you to look at what are the real reasons. First thing I found out wasn't the Civil War. We were divided way before the Civil War. So that's what I'll show you tonight a little bit. I want to go back. Here we go, Melanie. I want to go back to this one. Anybody want to tell me what that says?
Robert Mason,
Robert
History
Mason,
of Cannon County.
History of Cannon County, Tennessee. Okay? Because Cannon County, we were a part, this DeKalb County, I say we, DeKalb County was a part of Cannon County for a year solidly before we were a incorporated county. In fact, it's nearly 2 years. Why? Cannon County was established in January of 1836. And then, I've learned some things about that too. And then DeKalb County wasn't established until December of 1837. So let's show you something I found out just recently. As I've been digging out, I said, well, I really want to know about, you have to look at the climate of the whole situation, 1836, 1837. So now, guess what's happened? Okay, thank you. If I can read my other one. So I go from divided, a political history of DeKalb County, Tennessee, to this. This is proposal defense. Republicanism, that's really with a little r instead of a big R. Republicanism, political ideology, and political efficacy, convergence. A case study in DeKalb County, Tennessee, 1837 to 1900. Thank you. All right, so I go from just divided political history of DeKalb County, which I'm still going to probably keep for the forthcoming publication. But I go to this. Dr. Freddy Curtis, who's over the Gore Center, very economically oriented historian, economically and political historian. Probably, I told him the other day, I said, you're probably the only political historian after Dr. West retires. You're the only political historian left on the campus, which is sad to me. But he says it's cyclical. Political history is going to come back. He thinks it'll come back again as more. So there's my committee. Dr. Freddy Curtis is the chairman. Dr. West is a member. Dr. West was going to chair, but I think he's got 15 PhD students to try to get through. He's retiring in August. So my goal as a student was to get finished with this degree before Dr. West retires. And I'm going to achieve that if I can get this thesis in another class that I'm taking, which is part of the thesis, and get through that. All right, my advisor, Dr. Pruitt, same one who, she's over all the grad students, same one who I did my class with on the first part. All right, so what my thesis is literally changed to, if I can go down here and find my other one, is it's going to this. Okay? I give the prologue about DeKalb County and its division and all this other stuff. This study will examine how republicanism, political ideology, and political efficacy influenced 6 critical elections. He said to narrow it down, so I've had to narrow down and narrow down, narrow down, from the county established in 1837 to 1900. And I said this: local historians in DeKalb County discuss this political division in a general manner with little attempt to explain the reasons for ideological differences. Now, did I criticize Tommy Webb with that statement? No, I didn't. I didn't criticize Hale, didn't criticize Tommy, because they didn't deal with that. They reported the history. They reported the results of the elections. Okay? They didn't support, and what happened is that, why are the reasons? Why were we so divided that in 1844, the first major election that occurs in DeKalb County, I keep pounding myself, why is 1843, we were a county in 1837. Canada was a county in 1836. But what happened was this, and I found this out just recently, and that is, let me go over to here. Anybody know what happened in 1834? Okay, in 1834, we get a new Tennessee Constitution. And Tennessee, your ancestors that were moving to DeKalb County in the 1830s, 1840s, what I call the Great Migration into DeKalb County, because we were the Wild West. Literally, in 1796, all basically of West Tennessee was still Indian territory, or indigenous peoples territory, excuse me, get the right vernacular. But they were still settling. If you look at DeKalb census information from the counties we were in until in 1830 till 1840 census, you will see an amazing jump there. Okay, great people were coming here and coming here and coming here. Some because of Revolutionary War pensions, etc. They were buying off the acres of land and settling in DeKalb County. Tommy does a fantastic job, and Hale does too, of those early settlers, okay, that came into DeKalb County, and I don't want to go on all of that. But in 1834, the Constitution of Tennessee changed, and we became, and it says, notice what it says, may be established by legislature to consist of not less than 350 square miles. Okay, the yellow I've highlighted there to tell you this is more physical information. Okay, courthouses of any old county from which may be taken nearer than 12 miles. Okay, 12 miles, that's the critical factor. They got to be 12 miles apart. So many people were complaining, think if you lived here in this part of DeKalb County where I'm at right now, what county were you a part of? Any guesses? Warren County. Basically to the top of Snows Hills where the line was at, Tommy always told me. And I'm assuming that's right. If you look at the old maps, that's sort of very close, okay? All right, so if you were living here, and again, 1834, how many miles is it from the farthest point to McMinnville at the time? It was more than 12 miles. Okay. Same thing if you were under the hill. If you were under the hill, most of under the hill was in either Wilson or Smith County, particularly mostly Smith. Some of the other areas around where the Caney Fork is was White, the other side of the river. And then you got Smith County, and a large percentage was in Smith. Some of it was in Rutherford if you were over in that area there. Cannon County did not exist. So Cannon County was part of Warren County, and it was part of Smith County, and it was part of Rutherford County. Okay? So what it says is the 12-mile rule. No part of the county shall be taken off to form a new county or a part thereof without, anybody want to read that for me? Can you see that? The consent of a majority of the qualified voters in such part taken off. That's going to come in really important when we get to the formation of Cannon County. Because I can't talk about DeKalb without talking about Cannon. So Cannon was following these rules. 1834, some of them didn't like, the people of Danville did not like having to either go to part of what would become Cannon County was having to go to McMinnville, part of them were having to go to Murfreesboro, and even part of which will come to DeKalb County, Liberty, downtown Alexandria, will have to go to Carthage. Okay? Now, Carthage has its own difficulty. Smith County has its own difficulty because you've got some people up near the Kentucky line are saying, we're not far than 12 miles. So they're petitioning the legislature. So we've got those Whigs that are in the southern part of Smith County that are very politically active. I have found that out majorly. Very politically activated. Because at Smithville, what was here then in 1834 in Smithville? What do you think, Steve? What was here? Was Smithville here?
No.
1834? No. It was not here. All right? So what happens is that the seat of justice in said county shall not be removed without the concurrence of 2/3 of both branches of the legislature. So you can't change. Carthage you can't change. McMinnville you can't change, according to what was passed in 1834. And we'll move down just a little bit and see Section 5. Section 5 of the 1834 Constitution states, the citizens who may be included in any new county shall vote with county or counties from which they have been stricken off for members of Congress, for governor, and for members of the General Assembly until the next apportionment of members to the General Assembly. What was bugging me like crazy was after DeKalb County was formed in 1837, Canning County 1836, they were still voting with Smith County. In this area, it's Warren County. That was bugging me. Why wasn't I showing these elections that are taking place for governor, not for senator, because they were appointed by the legislature, but for governor and for Congress, for members of the General Assembly? Why are we still voting in Smith County, or why are we still voting in Warren County? Why? This is why. They said you're voting with your old county until the next apportionment of members of the General Assembly. Now, can anybody tell me when that was going to come? Political folks in here. Okay? What dealt with the apportionment? Anybody want to tell me?
You mean other than census?
It means the census. So you couldn't do anything till after the 1840 census, and then it was a year afterwards before they really got to gerrymandering and reapportionment of the legislature. And then DeKalb County then would have to select a member of the House of Representatives. Every county pretty well during that time got a member of the General Assembly, meaning the House of Representatives. The senator you shared. Okay, so they're not going to be voting probably until 1842. They were still voting in Smith County and Warren County. Some of them in White County. They were still going to their old polling places. Now, one thing what I don't point out here and that I can is on the 1834 new Constitution in Tennessee, it did something about voting. Up until that time, who voted? We're not political history, let's talk about who votes.
Just freemen.
Okay.
Landowners.
Okay. Property owners that were white. White male property owners. What the 1834 Constitution did, it also, particularly after the Nat Turner Rebellion, got people really worried about what free blacks might do. So in Tennessee, free African Americans were still allowed to vote by the 1796 Constitution, but after the 1834 Constitution, they stripped them, free African Americans, of voting. And then it says if you're a white male, you can vote. No matter whether you own property or not, you're a white male, you can vote. Okay, so white males in DeKalb County would have to travel to the voting precinct, the nearest place, of course, Alexandria, Liberty, part of Smith County, Smithville here, you'd have to probably go to Warren County. You'd have to go toward that area, whether the polling facility was at. You may have to go all the way into McMinnville to vote. Okay, so that's what they created. These new counties, Article 10 shows what it is. All right? So let me show you some things that I have recently unearthed regarding that, because that was just killing me I was reading all these things about republicanism and political ideology, republicanism saying there are certain tenets of republicanism that is very important. What is that? That my vote matters. That's political efficacy. Ideology is what you believe, and then republicanism was always looking at the factors of that, and some historians disagree with me on that. Paul Bergeron, the eminent historian for the University of Tennessee, he didn't think ideology really mattered any. He thought that was a reaction, where other political scientists and political historians said ideology, and that's what I've got to prove, and that's what I'm working on right now, is proving that republicanism is very important to Tennesseans, and particularly the citizens of DeKalb County. So that brings me back over to here. It says, this study will examine how republicanism, political ideology, and political efficacy influenced 6 critical elections. And I said, but Tommy and Hale attempted to explain the reasons for the ideological differences. They reported them. They effectively reported the effects of the political division of DeKalb throughout DeKalb County history. Still, these historians said little to substantiate the causes of this continuing political rift. And so this study will examine election data and primary and secondary sources in 3 eras and 6 critical elections to offer a credible explanation to underlying things. So what relationship did republicanism and them have in the founding, the antebellum period, the secession crisis, and the turn of century political activism in DeKalb County? So there's my deal. Why is this one rural county worth such a close look? I will tell you this, and I think most of you would probably agree with me, DeKalb County politics is a paradox. It is a paradox from the very start to to today. Just go to a county commission. Or how history is interpreted in DeKalb County was actually a vote not too long ago. So my deal is on political division. I want to think about republicanism, political ideology, political efficacy, how that results. And historiography, big bold bad word that literally means, how am I going to do this? Examine the common themes of republicanism. What are they? Fierce competition and a vigorous two-party system. Now, can I prove that it was vigorous two-party system in DeKalb County? Well, I'll get back to DeKalb County's founding in just a moment, but what I will show you is, if I can find it right here, on which one, William Freddy Curtis, I think it's this one. Political divided from its very inception. I'm going to show you that here in a minute, but let me show y'all this, and I'm going to come through and show y'all some other things. Let me catch up with where I'm at here.
I'm glad I took that speed reading course.
There you go. I'm coming back, Steve. I'm coming back to the appendix where I show you.
We're on page 132.
All right, here we go. All right, anybody want to look at the 1844 election between Clay and Polk? Right here, between Clay and Polk. 979 total people voted. And guess what? What was the difference in the votes? Clay, 488 votes. Polk, 491, a difference of 3 votes in a presidential race. Now, what's interesting to me, too, is the number of people totally that voted. These males that were voting. Starting in 1843, first election I can find, that of Jones versus, again, James K. Polk, difference of 54 votes in that one. What would be really interesting to me to find, because the writers, Jonathan Atkins, he's a professor at Berry College in Georgia, wrote a book on sectionalism of Tennessee during this time, and he based it on republicanism. So yeah, did I borrow his stuff? You best you guarantee I stole it. Absolutely, that's what historians do. You find a good idea, then guess what? We find that idea and we say, can I prove it? Big picture, that's what everybody keeps telling me. Dr. Kirk Curtis keeps telling me this. Big picture, small area, prove it. Okay, well, what have I got to prove it? I picked 1844. But now what he says, and I agree with Atkins, what he says, and Bergeron agrees with him too, so they both agree. They blame it on the 1839 election. The 1839 governor election in Tennessee was Newton Cannon, hello Cannon County, named in 1836 after Newton Cannon. It was going to be Marshall. Then during I'm starting to go through the journal. I have found an electronic copy of the Journal of the House and the Senate of Tennessee in 1836, 1837. So I've got an online resource, don't have to go to National TSLA. I can do it right from my confines of wherever I got a computer at in a signal. Okay? So what I have found in 1839 here in DeKalb County, which would come to DeKalb County, was it was very divided then, probably because of this. The Whigs were starting to rise more in opposition, mainly after Martin Van Buren's nomination. Because as Tennesseans, guess what? We didn't want. We're not going after King Andrew Jackson, the guy from Tennessee, the hero from Tennessee. Everybody was a Jackson supporter pretty well. Now there were some that weren't, that with the other opposition party or whatever, and then especially when John C. Calhoun started to rise more in South Carolina with nullification and the beginnings of what would later become the Civil War. But Calhoun and him, I've got Henry Clay going on, who him and Jackson did get along. All of that started, but what does that happen on? How does that affect here? Well, guess how it affects here? Was the bank wars. The battle for the national bank that Jackson opposes. Jackson opposes the national bank. Not for it. And so you get Tennesseans here, particularly in what would become DeKalb County, that were literally starting to choose sides. It started in 1839 with the Polk versus Newton Cannon, which Polk won rather decisively. Cannon, the Whigs kind of let up a little bit. But, Newton Cannon thought he had it, but he didn't. And what's ironic to me is when Cannon County was formed, and I'll show you that here in just a second, when Cannon County was formed, guess what it was? Sorry about that. It was predominantly what? Anybody want to know? Political party in Cannon County. Oh, I had it. Sorry about that. I'll get back to it. Cannon County formation. All right. This is the private act that was adopted in January of 1836, saying, okay, Cannon, how are we going to put in 1834 what it said in the Constitution and apply that to Cannon County? What I have recently found interesting in searching the journals of the House and the Senate in 1836, debate about Cannon County, was that there was huge division in the Tennessee General Assembly, in the Senate and the House. That's what I found out earlier today, was there's a huge schism on literally the formation of Cannon County, which said at the very bottom of its formation, this is all about how it was served, how it was, that I go down here and you had to have commissioners that set the boundaries and surveys and all of this. But here's what I found incredibly interesting in Cannon County is Section 14. Now you say, how does that affect DeKalb? It will here. Your Whigs in Smith County, by the way, Cannon County, it's ironic, was basically, when it was formulated, was basically Democratic. Fully supporting Andrew Jackson, very little opposition. You hear some say 10%, some say 20, somewhere in that time frame, that this Democratic county was named after the first Whig governor of Tennessee. That's what's ironic to me. Not named after a Democrat, and that was Trousdale who proposed the county. He just wanted the county to be done. William Trousdale was the state senator from this area. We'll talk about him in just a minute. They had been enacted that surplus territory, Alexander and Liberty area, the northwest portion of southern Smith County at the time was called a surplus area because we need to make sure that the boundaries of this area is within 12 miles of Carthage. Can't go any closer to Carthage than 12 miles. So the surplus territory in the southern part of the county of Smith shall be attached to and made a part of the county of Cannon on the following conditions. Okay, you guys want to be in Cannon County? Here are the conditions. Abraham Overall, Moses Allen, Leonard Lamberson, John Fite, and Joel Cheatham are hereby appointed commissioners who, or a majority of whom, shall proceed on or before the first day of May next, that was 1836, May 1836, and ascertain by actual survey the territory attached to the southern extremity of the county of Smith over and above 625 square miles, excepting the 15 square miles included in Cannon County already, not running the line near or within, it'll say, to the county seat, 12 miles of the town of Carthage. So soon as said fact shall be ascertained, it is hereby made the duty of said commissioners to hold an election at some suitable time and place to be designated by the commissioners and advertised at 4 of the most public places at least 10 days in said surplus territory for the purpose of ascertaining whether a majority of the citizens in such surplus territory are willing to be attached to the county of Cannon. So what we have here in this section of what was codified as law, okay, this act making Cannon County, you had to meet these conditions. Okay, and this you list some of the citizens, let me go back up, some of the citizens of Cannon County, which was later DeKalb. Anybody recognize any of those names? From DeKalb? What's
I
that?
was gonna say Fight's the only
You got John Fight, who was what? A Revolutionary War soldier. What about Leonard Lamberson? If you look at our list, okay, very important guy. I think also Revolutionary War soldier. And you've got Abraham Overall, big time political person in DeKalb County on the overalls. Okay, so you've got those. And then Joel Cheatham, I don't recognize that name. Do you recognize Moses Allen? Recognize that name. So these were commissioners whose job was to make sure the survey was right, and then after they made it right, then, okay, to hold an election. Now my job is, I need to know the results of that election. Now y'all can probably help me. Where do I find that? I don't find it in the acts of the state legislature. Okay, where do I find that at? Maybe in Cannon County, maybe in some of the Cannon County stuff that they had early on. I don't know where I might find that. Okay, but I'm assuming, make an assumption here, a historical assumption, that the majority voted to go with Cannon County in that surplus area. Okay, I would think so. All right, now this was established in January, and then an election that had to be done by when? And by the 1st of May. Okay, what did it say there? That had to be done by a particular time in May, I believe. May next, first day of May. Okay, are willing to be attached to the county of Cannon, and if upon counting the votes, it shall appear the majority of the voters competent to vote for members of the General Assembly have voted for the attached to be attached to the county of Cannon, then the said commissioner shall report the fact to the first term hereafter of the county court to be held. So evidently, I might could find that in the county court document, the first county court document in Cannon. Now, Melanie, I don't know if we can find that or not. The first meeting of the county court. Ever.
Mr. Bush owes me a day
So,
in the
Mr.
archives.
All right, so Mr. Bush he's probably got a copy of it. He can help me there. Okay? The citizens thereof shall be entitled to all rights, privileges, immunities, and exemptions of conferred by this act of the citizens of Cannon. So that had to take place. I'm assuming it did, but in the meantime, okay? Meanwhile, back at the ranch, as they used to say on TV,
I know who they appointed, all the appointees of the first county, so I bet you that's within that same thing. 'Cause they appointed
yeah, and
Rizzo.
I have got to that listing. Let me go back to here let me go back over here to, there we go. All right, that's that document. Let me go back to the other. I got too many Word documents open here. That's the transition. That's the, I guess it's there. Okay. So you can find, when I look at this document, I can locate I've got a listing of the county, first county commissioners that were, the DeKalb Countyans that were on the Cannon County Commission.
Now, is this document you're referring to right now, the one you've written?
This document that I was referring to, which one are you talking about?
What
now?
you just said, you said this document.
The
And you got
document
this-
that he's hunting for that has the, in Cannon County,
Right.
that first, that
Yeah.
he doesn't have.
Now, I got it, I
So
just
that's
want to make
part
sure what
two.
we're
Yeah.
talking about.
I'm trying to find my other document. I'm trying to find my original writings, what I'm trying to find here real quick. But in that document that we said, I think I've clicked off of it, is what it is. So let me go back here and find it. Should say William Freddy Curtis. I'm looking. It might help me. That's the thesis proposal. There it is. Okay, so if you look back in my appendix, it's still thinking, I got too many open. Okay, here we go. So if you look all the way down in my appendix, I've got a listing of the first DeKalb County commissioners that were later in Cannon County then. There we go. There's the first legislative body that I have there. And probably what I need to do is go and pull those Cannon County, I've got those in another document that lists the Cannon County electors that were from this area that represented, it was virtually the same ones that were, these same guys here, Goodner and Doss and Evans, all of these areas here were part of the first, the second, and the fifth, or probably a little of the fourth was that too. And that comes from a list from Tommy right there, from 111, which is Tommy Webb. Interview with the author on this particular date. And he told me these are the members of who they were, whether Whigs or Democrats. But I diverged, so let me move on. But what happened in the meantime was this guy was by the name of McWhirter, wrote to Trousdale, the state senator, telling him to say, hold on, you are messing up. You are messing us up royally in the Whigs because of the people of Danville. You are messing us up big time. Now, why did McWhirter say that? So I'm not seeing that right here. It may be in another file. Let me go over here to my, let's see, it's either here or it's in my other MTSU file. But there is a letter that he wrote, McWhirter wrote, and I'll try to find that for you, that McWhirter wrote and said to Trousdale, don't do this. There's still time. He wrote in February. There's still time before this special election because members of the surplus area, we don't know where to vote. We don't know if our votes are going to be counted. We don't know what's going on at the General Assembly whatsoever. We don't know what's happening. So what we would like for you to do is to tell us what's going on, what is happening at the General Assembly. And he does. But now I'd love to see a letter of response from Trousdale because there is no response there from Trousdale at all. Okay? The McWhirter letter to me is the one that points, what got me fired up is in the Trousdale papers at the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and he tells them, he says, why in the world are you doing this? You should not do this. And he lists it out. Let me find the McWhirter letter. It's driving me cut nuts because I can't find it. Maybe in the DeKalb County history folder here. That the McWhirter letter, formation, anybody see that? Nope, not there. So let me go see if I can find the McWhirter Trousdale letter that says that. But that's what, to me, is the foundational document, of DeKalb County, is the McWhirter letter. And I've got it in words where I had it redone so I could see what's going on. There's the Cannon County Quarterly first meeting that happened there. And let me see. But the McWhirter letter to me is the formational document for DeKalb County. Because what he asked for in that document is, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And so McWhirter says to them, and I'm looking back where Cannon County formation, it should be there, but I'm not seeing that document.
Freddie, could I ask a favor?
Yeah, go ahead while I'm
I mean,
looking.
What you're doing with your looking and showing all the different stuff, that would be great for me if I were trying to prove everything. But you've already proven everything. You have this knowledge. And what I'd like to recommend is that you just go ahead and present us with the story without your documentation.
Yeah, what I was trying to find there was that document that was the proof of DeKalb County being divided. So let me go back to, that's a great point, and I'll come back to that right now. And we'll go back to this and seeing, was this occurred? Yes, it did. And then was DeKalb County divided? Yes, it was. Totally divided by that point between Whigs and Democrats. So as a part of that, you can see, so that's just the title page. Let me go back and find it. There we go. Here we go.
What party did McWhirter belong to?
That's a great
I'm sure that's why he's telling you messed up.
That's a great question, because I think he was a Whig. Mason records in his book that these were disgruntled Whigs because Danville, Woodbury, which was Danville at the time, Danville was predominantly Democrats. And he said the Whigs of southern Smith County, and I agree with what Mason says, the Whigs of southern Smith County were disgruntled with that they were in this surplus area and they were not allowed to have the sacred honor of voting. That's what I was trying to prove. But the sacred honor of voting. So representation, taxation without representation, anybody remember what that was a part of?
It's on the DC license plate.
Yes, it is. But they are represented with the delegates, so technically.
Non-voting
Yeah,
delegate.
non-voting delegate, you're exactly right.
Eleanor Holmes.
All right, so you can see the Whigs and the Democrats here in the first county court, okay? So that brings me to the formation of DeKalb County. DeKalb County was formulated, and you saw the acts of DeKalb County. From that point on, every election was a divided election. Let me point that out, and as I move along, I'll point that out. And I'll try to get you an email copy of that, of the McWhirter letter.
But what you didn't have back then is what we have today, where a person can be an independent.
Correct.
Because they didn't understand that concept. You were either for us or against us.
So you either liked Andrew Jackson or you didn't, or you were for Newton Cannon or you were for Polk.
But you weren't allowed to be in the middle of the road.
Those just didn't vote
Because they couldn't.
because they couldn't, or didn't have the choice that they wanted, I guess. Now later on that changes though in DeKalb County history. But if you look at these, kind of look at this right over here. This tells me a lot. This is the difference in the vote. No matter who's voting. Okay, here is Trousdale running for governor. Okay, 2 votes against Brown. And that needs to change. We find that's a Republican, so I need to change that. But Trousdale was the Democrat, and then where are we at? Trousdale was the Democrat, and Brown was the Republican. 2 votes. So none of them are runaway elections. So you see, as we build up to the big thing that occurs. And by the way, this all comes from a document Ann Hopkins and William Lyons, Tennessee Vote, 1799. That's a book, of which I have a copy of it, and all of that. But you can see some of these other elections going on. Okay, that's probably the biggest one was right here. The 1856 presidential race between Buchanan and Fillmore. Man, how do you select that one? You know, going back to Fillmore and Buchanan, wow. So that was the biggest difference. And then you get up to 1859, there's some other elections going on too. The big 1859 congressional race in Tennessee, here in DeKalb County, between two DeKalb counties. John Savage, Democrat, and William B. Stokes, the Whig.
So my memory is such that.
Well,
what is
opposition
the-
party by that point, I'm
What
sorry.
is the American Party?
It was kind of the substitute when the Whig Party collapsed in the early 1850s. When the Whig Party collapsed, it was the opposition party. You're gonna give you an option, here's your option. American, they were the know-nothings. You know, if you're asked about it, I know nothing, okay? They were all that. So you've got all of that going on leading up to the Civil War, and then you can see here's, and I can talk about this if you want to. These are the representatives that DeKalb County chose. 1843, they choose, DeKalb Countyans choose a Whig. 1847, a Democrat. So you can see that he keeps varying. There's O. Stokes. There's Horace Overall, big Democrat. And then you got M.M. Bryan, which is an American or opposition party. And then after the war, Republicans. But before we get to the war, okay, this is an interesting one that I stole from Marcia Darras, her deal on Stokes, and so she displays in percentage forms the ownership of African Americans in DeKalb County. Who owned where? Again, it goes up to the differences that occurred before the American Civil War here. You had Whigs in the northern western part near on the Smith Fork Valley who owned the most slaves in DeKalb County, but they were Whigs, opposition, many of them. Now, there were some Democrats, yes, but a majority of that area were Whigs, which later would support the Union, which is interesting to me. Here's another one. Now, I give you a copy of this, distribution of slaves and slaveholders by district that she has in a chart form. She did this work in 1967 from the 1850 census. Okay, and then you got DeKalb County's role in the Civil War. But before that, let me go back up, and I have skipped that. And I'll come back to the election that occurs in the Civil War. Right before the Civil War, we find that should be a chart right there, but I don't think I did it. So in the chart form, let me, I can go to my website and get that for you real quick, or I can just come up here and look at the percentages in DeKalb County. So here we go with Stokes. Now let me show y'all something about the Civil War. You all know the Civil War history in DeKalb County? Right there is a picture, and you might tell me what cemetery that is from.
Hillview.
Eastview Cemetery, Alexandria. You saw the view, right? I guess this is Stokes' grave. Okay, that little red marker right up there. Anybody want to take a guess who that grave is? John F. Goodner. Both of them colonels. Union, Confederate. In fact, I wish I had a picture. I expand this out a little bit. Stokes is buried here. Right over here is Wheeler, Confederate. Just a row over. Now, to me, that's the proof that DeKalb County is totally divided, is that you got two colonels buried within each other, within 50 feet of each other, or about 50 feet from here back to where Goodner's buried.
That would prove death is the great equalizer.
There you go.
I can dig it.
No.
There you go.
Maybe they were wrestlers in a previous life, and they went out to lunch afterwards.
All right. But if you look at the stats regarding, John Savage versus William B. Stokes, I mean, both colonels, both former members of Congress. There was even division even within the Confederates and the Union, both, on who their leaders were going to be based on political situations. All right? Now, let me show you this. I've got this in a chart form. I need to put that in the and when I do another one, I put this in chart form. Tennessee's vote regarding secession, 69% to 31 to secede. This was the second vote. Middle Tennessee, a remarkable change occurred with 88% of the electorate voting for secession, about 833 in DeKalb County, and 642 voted to stay in the Union. So if you look at that percentage right there, we're not going to war as a united people. In fact, here's the way Tommy summarized it. This strong Union sentiment would have a lasting effect on events in DeKalb County, not only during the war, but for more than a century after. Okay? So even going to war, we were divided. Now the first vote was pretty well, we're staying in the Union. That was in February, and then by June, Lincoln had already asked for troops, and that's where everybody said this is the dividing line. Okay? Stokes first said he was going to Confederates, and he said, no, I'm going to stay. When he saw that when Nashville fell, okay, I'm staying. And a lot of the Whigs that owned slaves, you know, they were not as pro-Union as you would think they would be. They were divided. So we have all these political divisions going on, and then troops being raised, and then my big chart that shows DeKalb County, and this is where I'm going to stop, where it shows DeKalb County was hugely divided. And I'm going to probably put that in my thesis. I'm going to put this inside this instead of having it putting just in the appendix. I'm going to put it down here to where you can see it.
And were they divided because of the political, or they divided because of something else?
You had families divided too, so that's
True.
I mean, that's the other thing that's kind of interesting is, I mean, that's something that you see in all the old movies, but you actually did have it here in DeKalb County.
What I'm trying to do before I jump over on my thesis was, I've got all of the soldiers and all the regiments from DeKalb County, all of those 14 Union and 14 Confederate and 12 Union. What I would love to do, and what I was trying to do, is take the 1860 DeKalb County census and then do clusters. Okay? But what I have a problem with, and some of y'all will see this, and let me go back up here to the census information. There's Marcius. You did it by slaves, or slave ownership and percentages. Let me go up here just a little bit and show y'all this right here. Okay, there right there is to be the biggest quarrel is right here, and that is when I look at this right here. This is where gets me a lot. Let me make this a little smaller so you see the whole county. There we go.
What are the numbers? What are they showing us?
So this is the district numbers
Okay.
from the 1860 census. Okay, which the districts are. Now she showed slave ownership, but could we also, my deal is trying to overlay the data on top of it.
Is that why, because Stokes was, when he was in Congress, he's the one that put forward the legislation, as I recall, at least he was one of them, that gave blacks the right to vote. Is that because...
After 1865, when he was reelected to Congress, yes.
Right, but is that because that part, this area had the least number of slaves based on Marcia's slide you just showed us? I mean, when you look at...
Yeah, when you overlay
Marcia's...
Marcia's...
breaks the above the,
Yeah,
below the hill and above the hill.
Well, what happens when you do that, Steve, great question. When you do that, here's Marcia's stuff right there. I'm going to try to get Marcia to come and see, just talk to us about her research, 60 years ago. But when you look at this, the predominance of slaves are in the Northwest, 12% in the first district alone.
It's because that's where the agricultural land was at the time.
Exactly, the
South of
garden.
Smithville was still flatwood swamp.
All right, and if you'll think about this, Dr. West did a thing I'm reading right now. It was a article he did in Tennessee Historical Quarterly back in the 80s, but he looked at Democrat and Whig activists, comparing them in parts of Middle Tennessee. Didn't do DeKalb, wish he had. Saved me some stuff, but taking that research too, you could take those individuals who own slaves, and we've got that. We've got the agricultural census too. If you want to go even deeper than that, look at Owsley's work and Blanche Clark's work that they did in the 40s about saying all people, and I've said before, and you've heard me say this, all people weren't planters. DeKalb County did not really have any plantations, period. Why is that? Why didn't we have any plantations? We had some similar plantations, but
I'd say it had to do with the lay of the land here.
exactly.
You got hills, you got rivers, and valleys.
Yeah, natural
And
divisions.
there's no big, broad, flat land to plant on.
Which the big broad lands here in Flatwoods didn't start to be cultivated until really the invention of modern day fertilizer.
Yeah, post-World War II,
Yeah.
for the most part.
That when you get row cropping going on like it is now, and nursery industry and all that. But here, the fertile farmland was here. Bobby's exactly right. The fertile farmland was here, so that's where the predominance of those owning more than 5 slaves. Now, there was a lot of farmers had 1 or 2 slaves, or 3 or 4. You can look there at the major percentages. Here's the total number of slaves in the county per district. 12%, 4.5%, 1.4, and that District 11, you know where that's at? Dismal and Lower Hilton. And then you've got District 12. The more you are around this area is when you got them. Now, District 9 had several in and around this Smithville area that they live in Smithville, but their farms were somewhere else. I've looked at a lot of some of those census data, the census 1860 census data, and you can look at that. That says large, but they had a Smithville address, and they lived here in town, but they owned and leased out slaves to work somewhere else. To get a little bit more over by the river, kept the county fort, 6.1%, got 4% down here. Look at this, District 6, way down here on the border of Warren County. Belk, 0.7, not even 1% of the slaves were there. Okay, so I'm like Bobby is there, is that they probably was that area there was the predominance of the slave ownership was the Northwest. Which is ironic because many of them were Whigs. Because Whigs were usually the party that believed more in capitalism, was for the bank, and opposed Jackson. So a lot of these Whigs up there, their families was very divided. When it comes to the Civil War, okay, some of those Whigs went with the South, absolutely. Because they wanted to protect, and slavery becomes a huge issue, not at the first part, but at the later part, especially after the Emancipation Proclamation, after the Battle of Stones River, it becomes evident to many of these individuals, and some of these individuals that fought for the Confederacy or started out in those early units, the 7th Tennessee, the 24th Tennessee, the 23rd Tennessee. Those that signed on early on, the 7th went on to Virginia and never did come back until after the war. Whereas the 24th and others that were one of my ancestors, District 11, fought in the 24th, died at Shiloh, first day of Shiloh. But when you look at that and you say, wow, were we so divided? Well, first off, it started with the politics, and then it ended up in fighting. And some families were divided. Some families had brothers, and literally DeKalb County, one of Middle Tennessee's, we had the largest, and my argument here in this point, I can do a whole thesis on that, my argument is DeKalb County was the divided of the divided. Okay, and the Civil War. That's why we think the Civil War divided us. No, it was previous. All right, now I could go on in the other things regarding here, but to me that's a good stopping point. That 14 companies. Now I'm going to leave you with a story that Tommy would like to quote from you, and I'll have to find that in my other one, because it was the story that we mentioned. It goes even further up into history, into history than the other one, and that is this. Let me go after that. I keep clicking on that one. There we go. Transitions. Now, Republicanism, I can show you a quote from a guy who was the newspaper editor of the Alexandria paper, which we don't have anything left of that, but we do have a diary that he wrote. Would later substantially have wounds at Murfreesboro, Stones River, and he passes away. But he talked about Republicanism, saying this is the reason that we have fought to keep our republic and to do that. So we find in the other elections, after the DeKalb Countyans are allowed to vote, then we find a Democratic increase over the Whigs, over the Republicans, and then we find, because most of those Whigs, the former Whigs, became Republicans after the war, and continued on up through the 1890s, when populism divided the Democratic Party, and they didn't get as many votes, and so Republicans were allowed to make some inroads into Tennessee, in DeKalb County in the 1890s. And that's another one I'm going to focus on a little bit later. But there's a story here I want to try to point out for you about even in death. Now the Confederates, Allison's cavalry squadron had something that happened where you had right before the battle of Chickamauga, they had some desertions. And the old guy who was over them said, I figured they would all desert because, he said, every damn one of them was, their families were Democrats. Now, he was a Confederate, but he was a Whig. Now, so how ironic that we could be. And Stokes, was one of the major slave owners in DeKalb County, but yet supported the Union. And talking about irony, it's just crazy. But there's one thing I want to point out. I should have highlighted this so I can get to it rapidly. But Tommy told me a story about a gentleman who fought for the Confederacy here in the Smithville area, fought for the Confederacy, and later, though, he joined the Union Army toward the end of the war, like several others do. And what happens, and that's where he says few are left of the deathbed promisers, the Confederates who were Democrats said to their family members on their dying bed, never vote for a Republican, or I'll come back and haunt you. So, but Tommy tells the story that even in death, this one I quoted here, that quotes it, even in death. Because what happened, he ended up marrying, he was a Republican, and marries a Democrat, and when he dies, his wife's family will not let him be buried in their cemetery, because not that he fought for the Union, but because he was a Republican. So to me, that's probably the best Tommy story that I can tell you because of that. Of course, Dowtown becomes the development of Dowtown. Mainly former Union soldiers settle in that area. And Bobby, can you tell me why that might have occurred?
Downtown's a nice place to live.
Okay.
Well, they won that area. They won down there.
Well, I think probably partly because a lot of the you mentioned when I was there.
Well, the Dow Union soldier, of course, he made some lots there and sold off these lots to his former companions that fought for Blackburn and others. And Blackburn moves there too, and so they move there and have their own little union establishment there. And you see some of the others, Wingate Robinson and Johnny Conger that were elected from DeKalb County that were.
All these, Wingate Robinson lived in the Bobby Calvert house there at the foot of Snow Hill on the old road, still standing there. You can see it as you drive through.
Except it's not Culver home anymore.
And it's a new frontier.
New Frontiers.
Joe Blackburn lived there. I think his house is my understanding, his house is still standing. It's there on the left as you go toward the Baptist church out of the old downtown area. My great grandfather was in that. He was in Blackburn's bunch. He was in the 4th Mounted. So he was right there in the middle of town. Hathaway, I think. Bill Hathaway, I think maybe his father, I need to look back and see, built the house just north of my great-grandfather's, which would have been probably sold to him by my great-grandfather. So yes, I think they were all part of that, either 5th Cavalry or 4th Tennessee Mounted.
And I talk a lot about after the war, certainly the conscription of, or the things that occurred with the African Americans that were disenfranchised by the 1890s with those disfranchising laws. I talk about that. Talk about W.B. Du Bois in this portion. Talk about Du Bois and his where he was at and what he did in Alexandria at the Wheeler Schoolhouse, and talk about that. But the division, and you can see, I see some of my charts here of those that were, that did that. You can see the division. Let me show you real quick on these, and I'll shut up. In these races here, 1867 to 1872, you can see the total amount that voted in 1867, but why is that so low? Why is that so low of voters in 1867? The ex-Confederates were not voting until 1870. Okay?
Because they
1869 governors.
Right.
So you can see how that jumped up.
But wasn't that the issue with, again, Stokes and Congress giving the blacks vote when the Confederates still hadn't had their rights
That's
returned to
correct.
them?
That's exactly
Okay.
correct.
Which caused some of the frustration, I guess, that started the Ku Klux Klan, blah, 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 blah.
And then you see, look at this. I want to show you this. This is just fun to look at when you look at numbers. Look at Stokes, the radical Republican candidate, 1869 for governor. He loses DeKalb County. 658 to 980 center the Democrat, because guess who started to who got the ballot again? Ex-Confederates came back on. And I think 1870 is kind of a fluke with 965. I don't think there's a lot of interest in this particular race between Brown and Wisner. But 1872, you got the Republican versus the election there for president. And so you got 587 to 638 here in DeKalb County on the 1872 election. So still close. All right, somebody get the lights for me, and I will adjourn and say thank you so much for your patience with me on that. And when I look at elections today, or the political environment today, think about it. The political environment today, Steve, you could probably talk a whole lot about that.
Well, it's interesting to me.
We're not divided by party, but by issues, right?
Well, there's one issue that I find fascinating in DeKalb County is you're not from here. And I find that fascinating because I know people that have lived here for 40 years and, you know, they're not considered to be from here, so people don't want to listen to them. And then, you know, I find it fascinating though because that's their excuse, and then I found it interesting when somebody apparently.
Hey, I taught in Cannon County schools for